Hello and welcome. In this lesson we will learn how to make a simple knitted accessory. We will start by learning how to read a knitting pattern, cast the yarn onto the needles, and practice the fundamental stitches for knitting. We will also learn how to bind the project off the needles when complete. To finish, we will be learning a seaming technique to sew up the ends of our project. When complete, we will have a finished pair of fingerless mittens. We'll start with our pattern. This is a nice project for beginners. The materials that we need is about 100 yards of worsted weight wool, but you can use any wool that you have. We're going to make it about 7 inches from the wrist to just below the first joint of the index finger. The circumference will vary. There's no gauge that we will use because we'll be measuring the width of our hand to govern the piece. For the abbreviations in our pattern, we see that CO equals cast on, RS stands for right side, WS stands for wrong side, K stands for knit, P stands for purl, and ST and STS stands for stitch or stitches. Before we get started, we need to measure the circumference around our hand just above our thumb. This will provide us the length of our piece. For the instructions, we need to cast on 35 stitches. From there, we will knit 4 rows. This will begin our mitten pattern. In row 1, the wrong side row, we'll knit 5 stitches, place a stitch marker, and purl 20 stitches. We'll place another stitch marker and knit for 10 stitches. For the second row, or the right side row, we will knit across all 35 stitches, slipping the markers from one needle to another when we come to them. We will repeat these rows until the piece measures about 1 inch less than the circumference of our hand. We'll end with a right side row. From there, we will knit across all stitches, removing the markers, and then knit again for 2 more rows. When that is complete, we will bind the piece off and seam the open edges, leaving a hole for our thumbs. To begin, we cast on. There are many ways to do this, but we will use the long tail cast on method. Read through our pattern, we're ready to start knitting. And what you're going to need is your needle and yarn. And we're going to use a long tail cast on, a long tail knit cast on. So give yourself about 1 foot of yarn, about 12 inches, and then you start by making a slip knot. To do that, you just make a loop, pull the tail through and hold on to the tail, and then pull it tight. And put the needle in that loop, pull it tight again, and then you have your slip knot. And then all the cast on stitches are going to come from the tail, not from the yarn connected to the ball. I'm going to wrap it around our thumb, front of our thumb, wrap the tail yarn around the front of our index finger. As you can see, if you were to do this, you have this sort of triangle. You want to slip the tip of the needle up in the triangle, hold on to it, pinch it with your thumb and index finger, wrap the yarn connected to the ball around counterclockwise. So now we've made this kind of X here, and you're going to lean the yarn back through and let it all go. And there you've made a stitch. Wrap it around your index finger and your thumb, up into the triangle, pinch it, wrap it around, and pull it all through and let it go. Okay, and you're going to want to try and keep. And it may take some practice. Just keep wrapping it around, up into the center, and pull it all through. Go. To begin knitting, we switch the needles with the stitches to the left hand and the empty needle to the right. Okay, now we have 35 stitches on our needle. We've cast on 35 stitches. Okay, so we are ready to start our pattern. And the first line of the pattern says that we need to knit all the stitches for 4 rows. Okay, so in order to do a knit stitch, around. So now the point of our needle is facing to our right. Okay. We have 2 little pieces here. We have the piece that's connected to the ball, And we have this little leftover tail. As you can see, it's got a little end there. Okay, so we do not want to knit the tail, so we just sort of hold that out of the way. We want to knit the piece that's still connected to the ball. Okay, in order to do the knit stitch, we want to move our stitches closer to the tip of the needle, and we will take our needle in our right hand and insert it through the front of the stitch, you can see, but we want it behind the tip of the left needle. Okay, so do that one more time. Into the front of the stitch, coming out behind the tip, underneath the tip of the left needle. Okay, and once it's there, we're going to take our yarn, working yarn connected to the ball. We're going to wrap it around our right needle counterclockwise, and we're going to hold it so that it's in between the needles. Okay, and we can kind of pull that tight. Now it's in between the needles, and what we're going to do is slip the tip of that needle and that yarn through the stitch. So we can see it here. Here's our working yarn. We're going to take it and that right hand needle tip back through that stitch. And then we're going to slip that whole stitch off the needle, off the left hand needle. And you can pull that tight if you want to. We'll get to that. We do it again. In through the front so that the left hand needle is on top. Wrap our working yarn around the top of the right hand needle counterclockwise. And then we slip that back through the stitch and slip it off the needle. Okay. This is called the knit stitch. In the front so that our right hand needle is underneath the tip of the left hand needle. Wrap our working yarn counterclockwise around our right hand needle so that it's resting on the stitch, and slide the needle back through the stitch with our working yarn.
We will continue knitting all stitches for 4 rows.
Okay, after you knit your 4 rows, it should look something similar to this. Pretty much all the little knit bumpy edges here. When you knit every stitch of every row, you create a pattern or a stitch type called the garter stitch. And this is what the garter stitch looks like. Now as we go through the pattern, we're going to have a combination of garter stitch and what's called stockinette.
Once complete, we'll knit 5 stitches and begin the purl stitch on the wrong side of the pattern.
Okay, and this is where in the pattern it tells us to place our marker. Remember we talked about the stitch marker? It can be just a simple little twist tie. They make little plastic rings especially for it. Some people have really fancy ones. It's just something to let you know a certain place in the pattern. Okay. Now, like I said, we're going to do a combination of stockinette and garter stitch, and this is where the stockinette comes in. When you knit a row and then purl a row, that creates a stitch called stockinette stitching. A purl row is basically a knit stitch done backwards. So remember, on the knit stitch we went in the front of our stitch here. On a purl stitch, we're going to keep the needle in front as well as bring our working yarn to the front. See, just wrap it around so that it's in front of your work. Okay? And we're going to go in the top of the stitch now. Instead of going in through the bottom here, we're going to go in through the top. Come in, we want to keep the right hand needle on top this time. Remember, we're doing everything backwards for a purl stitch. So we've got that in through the top of the stitch. Okay, and we're keeping the right hand needle on top. Our yarn is in front, So we're going to still wrap it around counterclockwise, okay? Make that loop, and then we're going to pull that through and pull the stitch off, okay? You can see that again. In through the top there. Wrap it around counterclockwise, just like before. And just like before, we're going to slide the tip of the needle and the working yarn back.
We continue knitting, knit 5, purl 20, knit 10 on the wrong side, and knitting all stitches on the right side as per the pattern until the required length. Now we're ready to bind off.
When your piece gets to the desired length, you're going to need to do what's called binding off of the needle. And that's how we get the piece, the finished piece, off of our needles. So as you can see here, I just have this little example. What you do is when you're ready, you will knit the first 2 stitches, just like you did when you were working your piece. And then before you knit any more, you're going to want to pull that first stitch over the second stitch and slip it off the needle. So what you do is you just grab a hold of it with your left hand needle and slip it over the stitch in front. Oh, slip it over. Now you've bound off the first stitch. Looks a little messy there, but not to worry. Do it again with every stitch now, till the end of your piece. Okay. You can see it again, make a stitch, never having more than 2 stitches on the needle when you're binding off. Pick it up. Slip it over, working that until the end of your piece.
Once the piece is bound off, it's time to seam it closed.
Your piece is bound off and you're ready to sew it closed. You have this piece of fabric here. And we're ready to sew it closed. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in half. You need a tapestry needle like this. Something kind of thick, something that the yarn can go through. And we are going to begin by starting what's called our mattress stitch. Now I have some tails here that are kind of hanging loose, so just put those out of the way. You line up your ends, okay? There's my two sides. And I already have my sewing yarn connected just with a knot. But if you left a long enough tail, you could use that too. And if you can see here, you can see the loops pretty well defined. So what we're going to do is enter the loop this way, pull it through, and then go across to the next side to the next loop. You need to enter the loop the same way on each side, headed in the same direction. You don't want to come in like this side. We're going this direction. We're going to keep going like this until we get to our thumb hole, which we can either measure from the bottom of our piece where it needs to be, or you can slip the piece on your hand and sew it while it's on your hand, but that can be a little bit tricky. So it's better to just measure where you want your thumb hole to be and then start again past your thumb hole to the top. Once you have your piece all sewn up, you have yourself a fingerless mitten.